Hello, this is Jennifer Cummins again, Settlement Language Coordinator at AMSA. For our final presentation of the day, I'd like to introduce Sarah Schmuck and Lisa Herrera, PBLA Regional Coaches for the Center of Canadian Language Benchmarks. Sarah Schmuck has worked as an ESL instructor and curriculum leader in both secondary and adult ESL programs. She has an MA in Education with a specialization in reading and is currently a PBLA Regional Coach. Lisa Herrera taught in the Link ELSA program at ISS of BC for 15 years, and for the last 8 years she has been the lead instructional coordinator for the program. She is also a Canadian Language Benchmarks lead trainer and a regional coach for the national implementation of Portfolio-Based Language Assessment, PBLA, in Link. She has a Master of Educational Administration and Leadership degree from UBC. For participants, I will be monitoring questions throughout the presentation via chat, email, and Twitter. Please feel free to forward your questions on throughout the presentation. Sarah and Lisa will answer questions at the end of their presentation. And take it away, Lisa and Sarah.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm actually going to be the one starting. So hello to everyone. We'd like to start by thanking AMSA for providing this opportunity to bring the discussion of multi-level assessment to a wider group. The PBLA team has been working on supporting teachers with multi-level assessment through workshops at TESOL Canada last year and TESOL Ontario this past fall, where they were well received by teachers. PBLA welcomes this opportunity to present one way of approaching multi-level assessment to BC teachers through this webinar. On that note, welcome to all the participants today. Before we begin, we'd like to know how many participants are teachers delivering multi-level assessment and how many are administrators supporting multi-level assessment. So right now, please use the hands up button to answer. Please put your hand up if you're a teacher. If there are several people participating together at one site and at least one of you is a teacher, please put your hand up now.
Okay, we have 4 hands up.
4 hands up are teachers?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's see how many people are administrators. So please put your hand up now if you're an administrator. And again, if there are several people participating at one site and at least one of you is an administrator, please put your hand up now.
We've got 2 hands up.
Just 2 hands up.
Yeah.
So I'm curious who the rest of the people are, if they're not teachers or administrators, because I see that there's 43 people here in this webinar. Maybe people could just type quickly in the text box as to what their role is if you're not a teacher or administrator. Okay, well, I've seen some answers in the chat box there. There's some coordinators, there's some teachers, some people are saying both. So just to let you know, this presentation is geared towards teachers, but it will help administrators gain insight into the work that teachers do on a daily basis. And we will also offer some suggestions on how administrators could support teachers in this very important work. Next slide, please. In this session, we will talk about our assumptions around multi-level assessment, introduce some ways of differentiating tasks using SCIAN's framework, review a classroom multi-level assessment project, and hopefully leave enough time for questions. So a couple of housekeeping items. A handout package is available for this session. If you don't have it now, don't worry about downloading it and opening it now. You can participate without it, and it will be sent to you by AMSA after the webinar. You also don't need to worry about taking notes, as the key content of this PowerPoint is in the handout. So let's start. What do we mean by a multi-level class? So please have a look at the slide and choose the definition that you think is the most correct. I'm going to be silent for about 10 seconds now, so you have time to think and answer. Okay, well, most of you chose C. That's great. That was actually the answer that we were looking for. Don't worry if you chose A or B, though, because we're all right. You're all right. Multi-level classes are a reality for all teachers working in a CLB-related context. Can we go back to the slide? Great. First, multi-level classes can refer to classes that are designated across several benchmark levels. For example, a Link 2-3 class or a CLB 4-6 class. As well, multi-level can also refer to any class with a range of profiles within and between skills. For example, a typical CLB 3 class has learners with higher benchmarks and or lower benchmarks in each skill. Next slide. With regards to designated multi-level classes, guidance from IRCC states that, whenever possible, classes should not cover a range of more than 2 CLB levels, and it is up to programs to determine the benchmark range that is assessed in each class. However, a teacher should not be expected to assess a benchmark range of more than 3 levels. So for administrators, we recognize that this guideline might seem like an ideal when trying to meet the diverse clientele of your communities, where it is difficult to have a full class with only 1 or 2 levels. Where there are extreme multi-level classes, we encourage you to discuss your challenges in meeting this IRCC guideline with fellow coordinators and the IRCC officer in your community. Options could include recruiting volunteers and or teaching assistants to help teachers in the classroom. In consultation with your IRCC officer, adjust the program scheduling. For example, Monday and Wednesday, teach CLB 1-2-3, which is stage 1, and Tuesday and Thursday, teach CLB 4-5-6, which is stage 2, instead of combining all those levels into one class. If there are several programs in one area, programs could consider pooling resources and specialize. For example, one program could cover beginning literacy, another program could cover stage 1 learners, and another stage 2 learners. This may help meet clientele needs and create a more manageable teaching situation. Please note, funders are aware that multi-level assessment related to CLB is something that we're still working towards. What we've introduced through PBLA up to now is a process for developing assessment tasks at 1 level, and most published resources have assessment tasks at 1 level. We, the funders and the PBLA team, recognize that expectations for doing multi-level assessment need to be accompanied by support for how to do it, which is phased in gradually, and classroom resources that provide examples and models. Next slide, please. Our work on multi-level assessment in the context of PBLA is in response to instructors' questions and requests in the PBLA forum, and will continue to evolve based on teacher feedback. It is also based on the IRCC guidelines that state that whenever possible, classes should not address more than 2 CLB levels and that teachers should not be expected to assess more than 3 CLB levels. Our examples today start with looking at an approach to modifying and assessing across 2 benchmark levels that is useful in both types of multi-level classes that we described in slide 3. Note that the processes we are introducing can be used in classes where there is a greater range of CLB levels in each skill, but that is a focus for later work. So to review, our assumptions for module and material development are: we are presenting one way of approaching multi-level assessment. It is not the PBLA way or the only way. Many classroom instructors are practicing multi-level assessment already. What we are doing is presenting a way to talk about and plan for multi-level assessment, starting from wherever you are. Future resource development will incorporate multi-level assessment and will reflect the IRCC guidelines as noted. Our goal, or what we're working towards, is support classroom instructors to gradually, over time, develop assessment tasks that enable them to assign benchmarks at more than 1 level based on concrete evidence in the portfolio, and also to develop a common language for this discussion and to share materials. Next slide, please. And Sarah will be taking over at this point.
Good afternoon. We will begin the discussion this afternoon looking at SCIAN's framework. Remember, if you have the handout, you can take it out now. If you don't worry about it, because the information is available on the screen as well. Okay, so back to the framework. SCIAN identifies 3 factors that affect task difficulty: code or linguistic complexity, that is the language required to complete the task; cognitive complexity, the thinking required to complete the task; and communicative stress, the conditions under which the task is to be completed. So what we're going to do is a brief overview, and we're going to take a look at each of these in a bit more detail. When modifying tasks for your classroom, you may use more than one factor, but in this overview, we're only going to look at each factor separately. Next slide, please. Under code or linguistic complexity, that is the language required to complete the task, SCIAN identifies 3 areas that can affect task complexity. 1, linguistic complexity and variety, which refers to the use of simple versus complex language to explain ideas. 2nd, vocabulary load and variety, which refers to simplification of the text or task, such as a simplified job profile. And finally, redundancy and lexical density, which involves restating information by paraphrasing or elaborating ideas to make the text more comprehensible. In the CLB document, if you look at the sample tasks, you can find examples of tasks increasing in linguistic complexity as the CLB levels increase. So let's look at an example of how you could adjust real-world tasks for code complexity. Next slide, please. If we look at the first task, read a pamphlet on saving energy designed for literacy learners, one way we can make the same task linguistically harder is by having the learners read a pamphlet that has not been simplified. So now I'd like you to look at the second task and think about how you could make this task linguistically simpler. Next slide, please. In the lower left-hand corner, we've listed the 3 points for code complexity in red that may help you think of a task that would be linguistically simpler. So we're not going to talk for 20 seconds, so you have time to think, and then please type your task suggestions in the comment box. So how could you make order a 4-course meal with wine linguistically simpler? Sure. Order an appetizer, 1 course, a 2-course meal, no wine. No wine? Oh no. No. I agree with you, Jennifer. What do you mean no wine? Okay, so if we could have the next slide, please. As you can see, many of your answers are, go back 1, please. Thank you, yeah. As you can see, many of your answers are similar to our suggestions. We've offered 2 possible alternatives that would be appropriate for a lower CLB level. Okay, next slide, please. Next, we have cognitive complexity. So SCIAN proposes that the thinking required to complete the task can be grouped into 2 main categories: familiarity and/or processing. So task difficulty is affected by the learner's familiarity with 3 things: with the topic and predictability. You know, for example, what background knowledge does the learner have? Are the topics familiar, unfamiliar? With the genre or text types, for example, reading a personal note versus the terms of an employment document, and finally, familiarity with the type of task. So if you're doing a task such as filling in a form or talking on the telephone to make an appointment, if you're doing it for the first time or the 3rd time or the 5th time. As well, task difficulty is affected by the amount of processing required to complete the task. And this can involve information organization, for example, reading a story told sequentially versus told with flashbacks. Another is the amount of computation required by the learner to complete the task. So giving directions from home to work versus giving alternative directions due to a road closure. Third, the clarity and sufficiency of information given. This refers to explicit information versus implicit information that requires inferences. And finally, information type. So sorting foods into 4 categories based on the Canadian Food Guide versus designing a menu based on the Canadian Food Guide. Concrete tasks are easier than abstract tasks. Next slide, please. Again, let's look at a couple of real-world tasks where you will adjust the cognitive complexity. In the first example, the person writes a note about an accident at work, and this type of writing or genre is a more familiar task than filling in a workers' compensation form, for example. So now we're going to look at the second task, sequencing a set of pictures, and how can you make this task cognitively easier. Next slide, please. Okay, so again, in the lower left-hand corner, we've put in the points for cognitive complexity. It's hard to say that. Please think of a task that is cognitively simpler than sequencing a set of pictures showing how to open a cash register and then tell someone. We'll be quiet for 20 minutes, or 20 seconds, not 20 minutes, sorry. Please type your task suggestions in the box. Yeah, even with Jennifer and Theta's comments, I think that next slide, please, sorry. That is the same thing that we thought of, that if the sequence is completely or partially laid out, then describing how to open the cash register is going to be less cognitively complex. Great, thanks. Next slide, please. All right, so finally, let's look at what Skian calls communicative stress. That is the conditions under which the task is completed. You'll recognize that many of these factors are addressed in features of communication in CLB. The first 3, time limits and time pressure on the task, speed of presentation, and length of text are pretty self-explanatory. The other communicative stresses are the type of response required. So circling yes or no or ABC is easier than filling in the blank, which is easier than justifying a decision in a short answer. Another one is the number of participants. It is easier to speak with one person rather than a small group or in a large audience. And Skian also notes that it is easier to accomplish a task with fewer participants because with more participants, learners need to reach consensus to get the work done. And finally, the learner's opportunity to control the interaction, again reflected in the features of communication and profiles of ability, refers to being able to ask for repetition or requesting somebody to speak more slowly, as an example. All right. Next slide, please. So, final example. Let's look at a couple of real-world tasks. In the first example, 2 communicative adjustments are made. The length of the text they are listening to is adjusted, the short weather report versus an extended weather report. As well, the type of response is different, identifying a single activity versus creating a plan. So, we're going to ask you to look at the working with the group to design a poster. How could you, next slide please, how could you make this more difficult? And we've listed some ideas in the lower left-hand corner from communicative stress. We'll be silent for 20 seconds and let you type in some answers, please. Yeah, I think that, thanks Morgan and Andrea, I think that those are certainly the, next slide please, sorry, that those are certainly the ones that we came up with and would be the simplest, is just reducing the number of people you have to interact with, okay? So, next. Oh, wait just a minute, sorry. So we've completed this part of the presentation. It was a very brief introduction. There's lots of information in a short period of time. And thanks for jumping in and giving it a try. In the handout, there is a fuller explanation of the framework with multiple examples to help you out. All right, so next slide, please. So, where to begin? Designing an assessment task and tool that allows for multiple levels is critically important, especially given the time restrictions of most teachers. We'd like to introduce a simple process that we used when developing this project. First, we created a class profile to ensure that you have a clear picture of your classroom learners to make informed decisions when identifying the levels you're going to assess. Secondly, identify a module topic with cohesive real-world goals that is appropriate for the CLB level, adjusting and tweaking so that it fits the two levels. And then use this CLB 2012 document to identify the indicators of ability and the assessment criteria, and SCIAN's framework to look for ideas to modify the assessment task. And then after doing that and identifying the assessment criteria, design your assessment tool or task. So let's see what this process looks like in Kathy and Carly's classroom where they piloted this project. Remember, the modifications that were made in these next examples were across 2 benchmark levels. The tasks they developed were teacher-developed tasks, but you could use the same strategies to adjust or modify assessment tasks in published materials such as the LINK activities book. Next slide, please. All right, so I'm going to start with the class profile. We suggest taking a moment and creating a class profile. Class profiles allow teachers to see a snapshot of the actual levels represented in each skill area and assists in planning for assessment, in this case across 2 levels. Sometimes it confirms what the teacher suspects, but it can also provide surprising information. Kathy and Carly completed a class profile to map out actual benchmark levels for each skill to help with planning. Kathy found that most of her students had completed CLB, so assessing CLB4 was critical. Her next highest numbers had completed CLB2, so Kathy determined the 2 levels to assess and assign benchmarks for were CLB3 and CLB4. And looking at her class profile, you will notice that there are several students who have completed CLB4 in 1 or possibly 2 skills. In this class, CLB3 and 4 are being assessed. The assessment tasks weren't geared to CLB5, but a teacher could find opportunities to provide a challenge on some of these tasks. I think the important thing to remember is that these students' needs are still being addressed as the student is being taught and assessed at CLB3 or 4 in other skills. Okay.
So please take a few seconds to look at the real-world task goals for the module at a walk-in clinic. I'll just give you a couple seconds to read it. So in the next section, we will look at how the teachers in the project develop multi-level assessment tasks and tools for each real-world task goal, showing how a CLB3 module was adapted to include CLB4. And you've switched to the next slide. Thank you. So we'll start with the listening and speaking. The listening and speaking goals were to listen and respond to questions at a walk-in clinic or other health service. The teachers decided to combine the listening and speaking assessment and create a role play. When adjusting a task, teachers need to ask, what key adjustments make the most sense for this particular task? After reviewing the CLB document, the 2 adjustments chosen to make the speaking task appropriate for CLB4 were increasing the vocabulary expectation and expecting longer responses. Now we'd like you to think about 1 key adjustment to communicative stress that you could make to listening so this CLB3 task is usable with CLB4. And remember that the elements of communicative stress are found in the features of communication of the CLB document. So things like time limits, presentation speed, the length of the text, the type of the response, and the control that the learners have over the interactions. So I'm going to give you 20 seconds I'll be quiet for 20 seconds so you can think about and then write in some answers. And can you please type your adjustment ideas into the text box? So this is for the listening, and you want to think about how you can make it work for CLB4. How can you make it a little more challenging for CLB4? Any ideas? Okay, next slide, please. Oh, okay, we've got one idea from Andrea. Thank you. Speak quicker. Next slide, please. Okay, so after reviewing the CLB document for CLB4 listening, these teachers decided to increase the length of the text. So they asked they had two more questions which were asked by the intake personnel in order to increase the communicative stress for this task. So let's take a brief look at the assessment tool that was used. Next slide, please. And I can see that there were a couple more questions that came in, or a couple more comments that came in a little bit later, and they matched with what I was saying before. I'm not sure if you can read the details on this slide. If you can't, don't worry. This assessment task and tool is in the handout. So based on the CLB 2012 document, the speaking and listening criteria selected were specific to the task and then modified to reflect the difference between CLB 3 and 4. The key criteria modified are the discourse, so short and simple versus longer and connected, the vocabulary, limited versus adequate vocabulary, fluency, not adequate versus adequate. Both teachers chose to tape the role play. They assessed the listening during the role play and then listened to the tapes later to finalize the speaking assessment. The teachers decided to create a multi-level tool. That is, a tool that includes both CLB levels for the listening and the speaking tasks. So if you look at the listening task, you will see that the CLB3 students answered questions 1 to 6, and CLB4 students answered 2 additional questions. Please notice that the teachers have also matched the assessment criteria to the items to ensure that they are assessing the criteria. They have added this information to the top of the tool. On the speaking tool, the level of expectation for each criteria is aligned to the CLB and explicitly stated. The teachers found that combining the 2 levels on one assessment tool allowed learners to see both level expectations at the same time. Both teachers commented that when they reviewed the tapes, students said they better understood the criteria and the difference between the criteria, so understood what they needed to do to improve their skills. In addition, the teachers combined listening and speaking on one page to cut down on paper shuffling. The teachers liked it because everything was in one spot. Of course, a teacher could have the multi-level listening task on one paper and the multi-level speaking tool on another if they wished. Remember, this is only one example of a multi-level assessment tool. So for the teachers out there, don't think that you have to go about creating 2 skills on one assessment tool, but you certainly can if it would make it easier. Next slide, please. So now let's take a look at the reading and writing. The teachers developed separate tasks for reading and writing. For writing, after reviewing the CLB document, 2 adjustments were made so the writing task would be appropriate for CLB4. One was increasing the vocabulary load as a result of more complex questions. Now we'd like you to think about another key adjustment that you could make so this CLB3 task is usable with CLB4. Again, we're looking at communicative stress, and remember that communicative stress covers the kinds of variables that you find in the features of communication. So time limits, length of text, the type of response. I'll give you another 20 seconds to think and write down some answers, and please type your adjustment ideas into the text box. Okay, so increase the difficulty in the format, have a longer text. Okay, so those are good ideas. Next slide, please. And the idea about increasing the length of text is actually what these teachers did. So they increased the numbers of items, which I think is the same as what Andrea is saying there, is have a more difficult form. So now let's take a quick look at the task and the tool for writing. Next slide, please. Again, don't worry if you can't read the detail on this slide, as the form and the assessment tool are in the handout. So the medical form is based on authentic material, and again the teachers aim to create one multi-level task and tool that would serve both levels. On the task, all learners completed parts A, B, and C. CLB4 students completed part D. For the writing tool, the teachers identified the CLB level expectations for each criteria. An advantage for learners using a multi-level task meant most learners finished closer to the same time and were able to show what they could do at their level. Some CLB3 students tried Part D, and a few were successful. You don't need to do this now in your classrooms, of course, but it is a consideration to think about in the future. On the tool, learners could see the differences in what was expected for each level. Next slide, please, and we're going to switch back to Sarah.
Okay, so the last skill is reading, and the reading assessment task was to find information on the homepage of a walk-in clinic for services, hours, and location, etc., to make a decision about visiting. The first step was to find a reading text, and finding or developing appropriate reading text for an assessment task can be a challenge, which is not new to any of you. It's important to read the features of communication to guide you in your decision. Generally, a text can accommodate 2 levels, for example, CLB 1-2 or 3-4, but mostly the same text won't work across 4 levels, CLB 1, 2, 3, and 4, as you are asking learners to work with a text that's beyond level expectations. When the text is too difficult, learners are often unsuccessful. And then as a teacher, you can't determine if the problem is due to a lack of reading ability or the difficulty of the text itself. As well, if the text is too difficult, the teacher may only be limited to asking detail or level 1 type questions for the lower level students, which is only one of many important assessment criteria. In this case, an authentic text, a web page, was modified by reducing the overall amount of text and taking out the sections that were too complex for this level. For this text, we didn't change any language, but certainly that would be an acceptable modification for lower levels when needed to meet the features of communication. Next slide, please. Okay, the teachers asked themselves, what key adjustment makes the most sense for this particular task? When developing the reading task, one modification was adjusting the communicative stress by requiring different types of responses. CLB4 questions required short answers versus circling the correct answer for CLB3. So we'd like you to think about one key adjustment to cognitive complexity that you could make so this CLB3 task is usable with CLB4. Okay, we'll give you 20 seconds to write in some answers, and again you're talking about adjusting cognitive complexity, which would be topic, genre, information organization, amount of computation, information type. Any ideas? Okay, you could ask students to summarize. Yes, you could have, in the text itself, you could have less, oh wow, hold on. Put things in their own words, different specializations of doctors, okay? Okay, so let's look at the next slide, please. All those ideas are certainly things that you could do because there's lots of ways that you can modify cognitively for cognitive complexity. In this case, the teachers decided to change the type of information required, so finding details versus making decisions. And then if you could give me the next slide, please. Again, a multi-level task was created, and this is also in your handout if it's a little bit blurry. The teachers chose the assessment criteria, finding details and making choices and decisions, and then created the task ensuring the activities assessed the identified criteria. All learners read and filled in Part 1, finding details from the webpage, and Part 2, decision-making questions based on the information. CLB 4 learners completed Part 3 with 3 additional short answer questions, which required making more judgments. So teachers need to ensure that the items address the assessment criteria. As well, learners need to know what the criteria for assessment are. And you'll notice in this case that the assessment criteria are listed at the top of the task and with the identifying corresponding items on the task. So teachers marked on the task, but they did not transfer the information to a separate tool. PBLA does not require an assessment tool for receptive tasks. Teachers can certainly choose to create an assessment tool for receptive tasks if they find it easier to plan and mark. One advantage of the multi-level task was that most learners finished at relatively the same time. CLB 4 students weren't waiting as CLB 3 students struggled to finish. One of the teachers found a few CLB 3 learners wanted to try the CLB 4 task. One student was successful, the other was not. This opportunity to push themselves allowed students to take ownership of their learning. And you don't need to do this now, but it's important, I think, to remember for future consideration. So next slide, please. And Lisa.
So we're almost at the end of our presentation, and we want to leave you with some suggestions for teachers and administrators. So for teachers, as teachers, of course, we want to do our best by our students, and we want to be all things for our students. But it is important to keep our expectations reasonable. At this point, we have provided training on how to assess at one level. With this webinar, we are providing one way of developing multi-level assessment in your classroom that you can use as you move forward. IRCC is not expecting you to do everything all at once. Start where you're comfortable and start small. Perhaps you could post the SCIAN framework by your desk, and when creating your next multi-level assessment task, try incorporating one or more of the modifications. You can modify modules that are currently successful to address 2 levels. You could try having both CLB levels on the same task or tool to see if that is helpful for you. Remember, 2 heads are often better than 1. Find a partner and share multi-level modules and assessment tasks. And as well, don't forget to consult your lead teacher for advice and feedback. Next slide, please. And we're switching to Sarah.
So at the beginning of the presentation, we identified some programming considerations for administrators. And in addition to the programming side, administrators can provide support to teachers through adjusting expectations and creating opportunities for teachers. Administrators should continue deepening their understanding of PBLA to support teachers, like teachers doing skill using activities in conjunction with formal assessment tasks to gain artifacts, as you are doing with today's webinar, appreciating the complexity of multi-level assessment and IRCC expectations. Administrators could consider adjusting expectations and give teachers time to learn and not expect that they can formally assess all levels in their classes right away. Administrators could consider supporting multi-level teachers by providing resources such as volunteers or teacher assistants to help in classes, as mentioned earlier. As well, they could consider creating opportunities for teachers to develop multi-level modules and assessment tasks. As well, consider professional development time for teachers to connect with other multi-level teachers to share materials and strategies, or to learn through professional learning modules posted on the Moodle platform, which is opening in a site near you soon. An announcement will be sent out from CCLB about that. And then, just sort of a little plug at the end in this funding year, Continue your good advocacy with your IRCC officer for the importance of professional development funding to address PBLA and multi-level assessment, and continue to negotiate for your lead teacher funding. Next slide, please. So just a couple of things. The work that we were talking about today can be found in the revised ICLBA, again coming to a location near you, and with an announcement from CCLB. It includes chapters on developing multi-level assessment. The fundamentals of multi-level assessment outlined today are based on this chapter, and as well there are 2 classroom examples, one of which is Kathy and Carly's class, which we highlighted today. Next slide, please. The module presented today and 2 additional ones are available on the implementation package and can be downloaded by your lead teacher. CCLB, through IRCC support, is developing a PBLA multi-level module bank. This will be material developed by and for teachers, and each module will include a module plan with real-world task goals, assessment tasks in 4 skill areas that can be used as assessment tasks or informal skill-using activities, and some suggested lesson activities. And we hope that this ongoing project will be of direct benefit to teachers in the classroom. Next slide, please. If you are looking for more information or background reading, you could look up these references. In particular, if you're looking at developing or modifying tasks, Rossiter and Abbott and Justine Light, both of those are excellent resources for that. And then next slide, please. So questions, and I see that Andrea has a question about where lead teachers download these modules. If you go to the CCLB implementation package on Moodle, at the top of Moodle, you will find a thing that says, a very professional language there. You'll find a link that says PBLA Bank of Multi-Level Modules, and when you click on that folder, the 3 modules will be there. There's a CLB 1.2 module, the Kathy and Carly CLB 3.4 module, and there is a 5.6 module. 5.6 module.
Okay, so just a reminder to all of our participants, you can type your questions in the chat box. You can tweet us using hashtag AMSA events, or you can email them to events@amsa.org, or you can even click the hand icon on the left of the panel and we can enable your microphone. But we do have a few questions already in here for Sarah and Lisa. So one question is, are there plans in the future to make multi-level tool templates available for link providers?
For I can tell you what we're doing at CCLB. We are continuing working on the multi-level pilot, and those assessment tasks can act as templates. I don't know that it's possible to make a single template that works because everybody operates differently, but the pilots have different examples, so if you look at them, you might, well, hopefully you would find a template or an example that would resonate with you, and turn it into a template would be relatively simple, I think. Lisa, did you want to comment on that? Or?
No, I think that's probably, people will probably need to create a template that best fits what they're trying to do themselves.
Okay, and we have another question here. Maria says, I'm involved in the pre-arrival program, providing on-ground departure orientation and one-on-one assessment and needs analysis. I'd like to use this tool to do the assessment on the client visa holders. Can we use these tools or avail your services?
So these tools are not developed as a standardized assessment. If that's what you're looking for, these tools are developed to be used in a portfolio-based situation where you're gathering multiple pieces of evidence. So just one assessment on a client in a skill area is not going to give you enough information to make a CLB level decision. So if that's the question, if I understand it correctly, I don't think these tools would fit the needs that you're talking about.
Okay, and to follow up about multi-level tools, in terms of making these assessment tools, what are some key recommendations such as how many points of criteria, how to format the tool, etc.?
In terms of the criteria, I can start, Sarah, and you can jump in, feel free. In terms of the criteria, I know that teachers, many teachers would like us to say, you know, use 2 or use 4, but we really can't say that because it really does depend on the task and it depends on the competency area or areas that you're assessing. You really have to look at the task itself and consider what is really key for a person to be successful in the real world when they're doing that task, and to include the criteria that is relevant for that. So, you know, that might be 3 or 4. Obviously, you're going to limit the criteria so that you don't have, you know, 10 items that you're checking for, but you do want to be thinking about the task in the real world and the criteria that is the most relevant for that. Is that what you'd say, Sarah?
Yeah, I would agree, and you actually, the only thing I was going to add was that you want to make sure it's manageable.
Yes.
For you as a teacher and also for the learner, so that they can focus on what you're assessing. And Jennifer, was there a second part to that question?
It was in terms of format. How would you go about formatting these tools?
I think there's lots of different formats that you can use, and I know in the Classroom Teachers Assessment Toolbox that was developed by Listen originally, or ELSANET and then Listen originally, there are multiple different formats that you could use. So I think the most important thing is that it's clear, easy to scan for the learners, and easy to see for the teachers.
Good advice.
Yeah.
Sarah, did you have anything to add? Yeah.
Yeah, I think you have to decide what's comfortable for you, right? So for me, I like having everything on one piece of paper because that works for me. And that might not work for other people. And Lisa, when she was giving sort of some suggestions for teachers, said that one of the things you could do would just look at some of those examples and try some things out, and you know, because you have all that extra time. I say that sarcastically, but you know, if you could do it with somebody and you could trade back and forth, if you can try some options, that would be great. But I really could agree that having it clear, having it simple, and having the assessment criteria be clear to the learner for both receptive and productive tasks is important.
Okay, yes.
Marius asked a question about CLB assessment in other countries. No.
Yeah. Yeah.
We don't.
Marius, you can email me at jcummins@amsa.org, and I can answer those kind of questions through email. But Andrea has a question here. In the slide of Kathy's class, you had chosen not to assess, well, you or the teachers actually had chosen not to assess some of the highest levels. How would that work for their portfolio?
Okay. let's see if I can do this. So if I'm going to assume, Andrea, that what you're saying, if somebody was a CLB 5, for example, and you're assessing for CLB 3 and 4, if that's correct, I think that the student, your CLB 5 student, let's say in speaking, would continue to participate in the tasks, and they wouldn't be sitting in the sideline. If everybody's doing that task, then they would be doing it as well. Occasionally you will have the opportunity to slip in an extra question or put something in, which doesn't make it an assessment task, but it does provide some challenge. And then those entries are put in their portfolio. When you are assessing the portfolio and you're filling out the progress report, you would probably be checking outside the range of your class. So you weren't actually the speaking skill because that wasn't that was outside the range of your class. And then but they're still practicing, and you would do as much as you could to sort of get them to keep talking and stuff. And in one of their skills, well, more than one other wouldn't be in that class, in 2 or 3 of the skills they are working at CLB 3 or 4, and then you are evaluating their portfolio and assigning a benchmark. Did I say that right, Lisa? I always have to think of I always have to think about that because of the different levels. But
I think that's right. If we're if they needed to be assessed in CLB 5, that's outside the range of your CLB 3-4 class, and so you're having them continue learning with you for those skills. But when it comes time to evaluate their portfolio, you're choosing that it's outside the range of your class.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I'm going to end on easy question. Are there some levels that are harder to assess as multi-levels combined than others? For example, are 3, 4 easier to assess together than 4 and 5?
4 and 5 crosses stages. And personally, I would at all costs avoid having a 4-5 class. I know that might, sort of address the learners in your area, but 4 is stage 1 and 5 is stage 2. And if you look, if you examine those 2 CLB levels and compare them, the differences between them are often, they just make it too difficult to do what we were showing you to do, which is to adjust the text, adjust the parameters to make it easy for you to assess. So if administrators are thinking about classes, if you can try to keep a multi-level class within a stage, it's going to be much easier for the teachers as well as for the learners. Would you agree, Sarah?
Yeah, it becomes all things are doable.
Of course.
The question is whether all things are reasonable and
sustainable.
And yeah, and that it is a difficult thing because it's simple text versus moderate text, and so they become real challenges, for classroom teachers. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think I'm going to stop this now. If your questions haven't been answered, I will be collecting all of them for information purposes, as well as ideas for future training opportunities. Those will also be forwarded to Lisa and Sarah, and they will take those forward as well for information purposes. Yes?
Jennifer, Andrea made a comment about literacy. I'm not going to answer the question, but there's a fair amount of stuff that's going on with literacy right now, kind of behind the scenes, and so some announcements should be coming out from CCLB about some literacy support.
Oh, that's great. That's great information.
Yeah.
And definitely AMSA will keep our eye out for that. And when that information comes available, definitely we'll be emailing that out to the BC link providers. So thank you very much, Lisa and Sarah, for a very informative and interactive webinar. And we'll be signing you off, and then we just have a few things to wrap up the event. We want to thank everybody, whether you are here still or not, for joining us today. This started at 9 a.m. and now it's 5 p.m. We will be emailing everybody an online evaluation form. Please take the time to fill it out, as AMSA relies on the feedback provided in the evaluations to plan future events and trainings. A special thank you to all our speakers for giving us their time and expertise to support the settlement sector. Thank you very much for our AMSA team for working a very long day today. Thank you to all of our speakers, and finally we would like to thank Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada for funding this event today. We will be posting the presentations and resources on the AMSA website. We will send out a notification on SetNet when they are posted. If you do not receive the weekly updates for SetNet, log on to our website and sign up. It's free to everyone. Thank you very much and have a great day.